Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for Tampa Bay Inno's virtual panel discussion, The State of Innovation, Employee of the Future. I'm Alexis Milner, Editor-in-Chief of the Tampa Bay Business Journal, and I'm really pleased that you've all joined us today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Tampa Bay Inno and what we do, Inno is a sister publication of the Business Journal, and we are currently part of a growing network of sites. We're currently in 18 markets, with more coming soon. And we're committed to covering and connecting the people active in local technology, in startups, and growth and innovation. Some big news yesterday, we launched Miami Inno. So be sure to check out the innovation happening in South Florida. Here, please check out tampabayinno.com every day to see what we're all about. And if you aren't already, sign up for The Beat, our twice a week newsletter. The Beat is really the best way to stay plugged into everything that's impacting the local innovation economy. In it, you'll get the local tech and startup news you need, analysis you really will not find anywhere else, information on upcoming events and cool job openings, and really much, much more, all in a fun and conversational way. In a minute, we'll meet the person who diligently provides all the valuable information on The Beat and who is dedicated to shining a spotlight on local startups and innovators in Tampa Bay, our very own Inno reporter, and the moderator for today's discussion, Coffey. But first, I really want to thank our presenting sponsor, Accenture, who is proud to support local innovators, startups, and businesses on their digital transformation journeys, and really for making this possible today, along with Tampa Bay Inno founding partners, OmniPublic, Synapse, and the University of Tampa. Thank you all very much. And now it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome Coffey, who will be moderating the discussion, and you'll meet the panelists. Lauren, take it away.
Thanks, Alexis, for your kind words as always, and thanks for kind of kicking us off today. So, I mean, he covered a lot of what we do and what I usually talk about, but just to reiterate, please go to tampabayinno.com, subscribe for our newsletter. You can get fun little updates about tech and news and events like this. So just another plug for that. But now I'll bring you to what you're all here for, which is our panel. So we will have Jason Warnke come on, Amanda Herring, and Jesus Vidaurri. So perfect. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, you look great. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. And like I told you guys kind of during our warm up, I think between the three of you, we will cover every aspect of the employee of the future possible. So let's just dive right into it. Can you just go around and say who you are, who you work for, what you do? And Amanda, we'll start with you.
Sure, happy to. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here this afternoon. I guess it is already. But I'm Amanda Herring. I am livingHR's Chief Experience Officer. We're an organization that was founded in the Tampa Bay area. Our HQ is in the Tampa Bay area, but we work with clients across the country and the US. And what we really are is an agency for work. So we really focus on humanizing work and making work better through building inclusive cultures, optimizing talent, and generally creating more humanized experiences across the board. So like Lauren said, that can mean a lot of things. So hopefully I can contribute to this conversation well.
Great, thank you. Jason, you want to tell us what you're all about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first off, I'd like to thank you for having us here today. This is going to be a fun topic. Jason Warnke, I lead digital experience at Accenture. Accenture's more than 500,000 people globally that focus on solving our clients' toughest challenges from technology, experience, operations, and strategy. And my role is inside of our IT organization where I lead our experience agenda, working in close conjunction with our HR counterparts that have an employee experience function. So we work very tightly on driving, improved experiences for all of our key stakeholders inside and outside of Accenture. So glad to be here today. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Jesus, round us out.
Absolutely, and just to reiterate what Jason just said, thank you first of all for having us here. It's definitely a pleasure. And so my name is Jesus Vidaurri. I'm one of the senior talent acquisition partners over at Tech Data. I primarily support our technology department, so everything that rolls into our CIO. I've been doing tech recruiting for almost 7+ years, all in Tampa Bay area, and I've seen the area transform and just really become evolutionary over the past couple of years. And so really excited to be here and hoping to contribute a lot to the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Just dive right into it. So one of the reasons we chose employee of the future versus the future of work that everyone's been talking about is that can often focus on, whether we're in person or remote. I know obviously by our backgrounds, we're all at home right now, but just throwing away the remote, hybrid, whatever discussion, what does the employee of the future look like to you? Jason, we'll start with you.
Sure. This is a fun one because I think we're defining it as we go. Certainly, we've not had this sort of revolution before that we've had to really think about this and actually put definitions and words to it in a way that's, Amanda, I love how you talk about the human-centric approach to things. So when we talk about this topic, oftentimes we love to get into this terminology around the place where people work. And so when you attach words to it like hybrid, you're typically talking about a mix of where you're working from a location like an office or a campus or a home or a coffee shop or wherever. But the way that we'd like to talk, our CEO, Julie Sweet, used this term that we love and we're rallying around, which is this concept of an omni-connected experience. And that is really, and I have it here in front of me because I didn't want to misquote it, but essentially it's the concept of being included, being connected, and of belonging, regardless of physical location. It puts physical location as the sort of afterthought. And I love that we sort of have this time for us to really do what, the three of us have been focusing on for a while, is putting the human first and thinking about the experience that you deliver, regardless of location. Just so happens that we've had this sort of forcing function over the past year or so to really get us to think about that. So that's the way we describe it, is that omni-connected experience, and the location just is another dynamic, but not the central dynamic.
Okay, love that. Jesus, what about you? What does the employee of the future mean?
Yeah, I think for me, and just in general, what I've heard in the market and how people describe this is really just somebody who's versatile and untethered, right? It gives people the opportunity, especially right now, more so than ever, it gives us the opportunity to really explore what we're all about outside of the office, as well as inside, right? I mean, obviously there's individuals that prefer the in-office feel and being around other people, and there's others that just perform a lot better, at home or in the coffee shop, as Jason mentioned earlier. It's given people the opportunity to identify with where they are most successful, right? And so I think that the employee of the future is really going to be somebody who is going to be untethered. They're not going to be attached to one certain place. It's going to allow them to really explore their creative minds, be more innovative. Again, not be, so connected to one particular location or place where they feel that they're confined to that area, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, again, to reiterate some of what Jason just said, I mean, last year really just showed us how versatile we can be as professionals, as people in the market, and as the world transforms and we're kind of evolving with it. We're starting to see that there isn't a one size fits all to the shoe, right? I mean, there's different ways to approach different situations in the ways that we work, and so that's how I really see the employee of the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think flexibility is going to be a thing that we dive a lot into during this. So I'm looking forward to unpacking that more. But Amanda, do you have any other thoughts to that?
Sure. Yeah. So, we're talking about the employee of the future, and I think that idea of the future and the quote new norm is so tough to grab onto. So I've just been calling it the now times. So
I love that.
the now times. I think that Jason and Jesus really captured a lot of the fact that I don't think the employee of the future is all that different. The way that they show up is different, and the way that employers need to respond to the employee of the future is different. So they've always wanted to be included, connected, feel like they belong, feel considered. It's just that they not only have been given more of a voice now, but they also feel a sense of obligation to advocate for themselves and advocate for others. It's kind of this community feeling as employees, no matter what they do. You see it in every industry where they are finally asking for the things they've always wanted but didn't feel like they could ask for. And so I think the difference in either the now times and the future is that employees are just going to be a lot more vocal and visible about their needs, which are a lot of what has already been mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Definitely. I love that though. Okay. I mean, I know we just mentioned flexibility. So there's been a lot written about how there's never going to be a one size fits all solution, even for businesses that are similar size or in the same industry. But what about different approaches for departments? So like, should there be a one size fits all for accounting or with IT where they're a lot more obviously technologically sound? So can and should businesses have different setups under one roof? And Amanda, we'll start with you.
So I like to give my answer that's a non-answer, which is the yes, it depends. But typically when we consider what the employee of the future will want, it is a more customized approach to their needs. So, looking at organizations, especially when we consider, hybrid workforces, if we're talking remote, in person, a combination, or more traditional workforce makeups like more freelancers, contract workers working in harmony with full-time employees, it just necessitates a more creative approach to, okay, how do we all work best together? And so, it starts with asking those different departments and functions how they like to work best, opening up that communication and really being partners in making work better between employee leadership and organization. But the key to doing that well is understanding what our non-negotiables are and what our consistency looks like across the board. So in order to do this more, tailored approach by function or department, you have to establish essentially what our culture code is, our code as an organization, how we behave, how we operate, how we treat one another, and what we expect of each other. So even if you have different levels of flexibility or different, scenarios for how or where we work, what is the same, what's most important, and focus on those things and make sure it's clear to everyone.
Okay, great. Jesus, what about you? What has Tech Data been talking about? Because I know there's been conversations over there, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about it from just a holistic point of view, right? In terms of from a talent acquisition and recruiting perspective, from my perspective, I've had the opportunity to recruit across all departments, not just technology, and that's just the nature of our business here at Tech Data. But I've had the opportunity to recruit for accounting and finance, operations, sales, IT, and what you notice with each of those skill sets is that there are very specific needs to each one of them, right? And so when I look at the different departments, our IT department, I would say has been ahead of the curve in terms of more remote work, and it's just natural that it would happen, right? I mean, a lot of our developers, project managers, even UI engineers, like they'll sit at home and they can do the work very efficiently and effectively, and sometimes they prefer that, right? And not to mention that we've been growing tremendously as an organization, and so oftentimes there's that conversation of real estate, right? I mean, where do we fit everybody if we continue to grow? And so that's where the hybrid model does work in those certain situations. But again, going back to the conversation around skill sets specifically, I mean, again, an IT person or a technical person is going to be very different than a salesperson, where a salesperson might be more customer focused. They might, in terms of Tech Data, maybe talking to vendors and partners and having more of that upfront in-person type of feel to their work environment. And then it might be different for a finance and accounting person, where they may be behind the scenes doing more financial work, and again, the work from home model may work best for them, right? So I think that from the approach of different departments and what they need, going back to what Amanda said, it really depends on their needs overall as a department and as individuals, but as well as having that consistency to say, hey, there are certain requirements that we would prefer that you have here, specifically in this department, whether it's, hey, maybe we're meeting with customers every Friday or every Wednesday, right? Or hey, we're having collaborations or scrum meetings every Tuesdays, right? So there's going to be this kind of give and take, right? But at the same time, employers are going to have to adapt to some of those requests. And I think Amanda mentioned earlier too, it is just part of the conversation now. And sometimes, and I will say this, it is part of even the negotiation when it comes to an employee coming to work for a company like Tech Data, or for any other company for that matter, right? It is part of the discussion when it comes to an offer nowadays. And so we have to take that into account. And I'll touch more on that later, but those are just some of my thoughts relative to a talent acquisition and recruitment perspective.
Yeah, no, really good. I look forward to unpacking that, because I think everyone started nodding when you said it was part of the negotiation now. So we'll unpack that later. But Jason, what about you? I know Accenture is obviously a huge global company. Are there certain departments that can be fully online or fully like in person?
Yeah, and if I think of the evolution of Accenture itself, you realize what a different world we are over our history than the reality that Amanda and Jesus have just mentioned. And I started with Accenture when it was Anderson Consulting 25 years ago, and we had less than a tenth of the number of people we have today, and we were pretty standard, sort of organization. In other words, all the roles were basically the same. We were consultants. We were traveling to our client sites, or we would spend some time in Accenture offices. We certainly weren't working from home, but everyone's job was basically the same sort of thing. Fast forward 25 years, Accenture with over 500,000 people, and we hire over 100,000 people a year. So we definitely have and that organization has changed dramatically. We went from consulting into technology and operations, and Industry X now is a thing where we're helping design, factories of the future, and we're the world's largest digital agency. So you've got like advertising digital sort of folks, and you have TV production people, and the diversity of the roles over that duration, and certainly that's not slowing down. It's only going to get more diverse, and the skill sets brought to the table, and the backgrounds and the culture differences have expanded just so exponentially that you have to think about. There are certain types of roles and certain geographies and locations where it makes sense to have a different mix. What is certainly consistent across all of them is there is going to be a mix, even in the roles where you would think it's traditionally has to all happen together. It's, a team designing a factory of the future is an example of where people need to be in that factory perhaps. But there's going to be a mix. There's going to be some portion that are going to be remote. Perhaps they've got a HoloLens on or a VR device that allows them to participate like they were there. So we have to design the sort of roles and the ways that people work, realizing that there is always going to be a mix. Someday you'll get to be in that location physically, and other days you won't, regardless of role. But what we've done is gone sort of across job functions and said, what's the right sort of mix? And that's not saying this is the way it has to be. This is saying in the reality of that job function that has maybe a higher percentage of time where they need to physically be together, what are the different tooling, what's the different tooling we need to provide them and their counterparts that might be remote to make that work effectively? And that's going to evolve. It's not going to be perfect. We're not going to get it right the first time or the 10th time, maybe the 20th time, but that's an iterative approach, and that will never change. The thing that I think did change in this whole thing is now we're actually, Amanda, to your point, we're woken up to, we have to adapt to what the employees are saying works best for them, and knowing that that is not going to stay a constant. They're going to say, yeah, that's great, but now I need this, and now I need this. So I think that's what will happen going forward.
Okay, interesting. So what I'm hearing is a lot of it depends, and just talk about it with your employees. But to get a little more of a concrete, I guess, answer, is there anything that 99.9% of the time is best done in person? And on the flip side, is there anything that's best done remotely? I know, Jesus, you touched a little bit on that with meetings in person, so I'll pass it off to you first.
Yeah, I do think that there are certain aspects that, again, going back to my previous response to the last question, is that, every individual is going to be different, and I would speak on how Tech Data has handled like our transition to working from home. In that, when I talk to candidates and they ask me like, hey, am I going to get a laptop? Am I going to get systems, so on and so forth? I say, absolutely. We're going to provide you the bare essentials. However, speak to your manager, and we can get you a desk chair. We can get you extra monitors. We can get you whatever you need to make sure that you're successful. That's not going to be the case for everybody. Some people can work off of one screen and they're completely okay, and their job may warrant that, right? Working off of one screen. Some people may need 3 monitors to do the work that they do, right? They have spreadsheets, and they got Excel on one side, they got Tableau on the other, and they're doing all kinds of calculations and analyses that require multiple screens. And you also got to think about it from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, right? Not everybody's going to fit in the same chair, right? Or they may not have the means to purchase their own chair. And so, our organization is more than happy to provide, from an ergonomical standpoint, the needs that the things that they need to be successful, whether it's, a stand for their monitors, or, to increase the height, or the correct desk chair to make sure that you're not having back problems, or if you need, reasonable accommodations, things of that nature, where you got to think about it from that perspective, is that not everybody might have the means right away to also afford these certain tools and necessities to get their job done, and also just being able to be comfortable in their environment if they are working from home. But the same goes if you're in the office, right? You got to think about those things as well, and make sure that there are reasonable accommodations for your employees from that perspective as well. But again, talking about both from a physical and just the requirements of the job itself, there has to be some level of customization if we are going to be either remote or hybrid. But there also has to be some level of consistency. Again, going back to, if there are certain things that need to be done for a specific skill set, whether it's finance, accounting, sales, et cetera, then those need to be fully understood. And I think it really comes down to having really measurable processes and procedures, and policies that will ensure that there is a level of consistency, right? So that needs to be, at least implemented correctly, so that there's that level of consistency, but so that we can also accommodate any type of customization that an individual may require to make sure that they're able to do their job correctly. So those are some of the things that I might add to that particular conversation.
Okay. Jason, do you have any like hard and fast, this has to be done in the office, or this has to be done hybrid, or it does better in the office or hybrid?
I think every one of those things that we thought needed to be 99% plus in person, we found over the last year how to get it done. So right at the start, it was first our design thinking professionals that do everything in front of whiteboards and post-it notes, and they take clients through really tough challenges, doing that best in a room. And they said, there's no way we can do that without having everyone in the room. Well, we proved that wrong with amazing tools that are out there these days. There is the, hey, if we're going to go do a client pitch, what we call like a client oral session on a big RFP response, you had to do that in person. You had to get in there and you had to present it. Well, we figured out how to do that really well, and as did everyone. But what you see in maybe just those two examples, and there are tons more, is it's what happens in the spaces between the activities that I think is the magical in-person part. And that's what I think is going to bring people more often to physical locations, to get that when there's a break, people go in the hallway, they have the little side conversations. In any of those scenarios, that works better when people are together, right? It's the dinners that happen afterwards and those conversations that sometimes are more rich and fruitful than the discussions that happen in a very formal way. And the way that for onboarding, when we bring people into Accenture and they join these start groups and they learn about Accenture and the culture and they form these teams and all these sorts of things, what we hear all the time is the best part of those things is what happens in the blank spaces. And so what we've been doing with VR is trying to create that through the VR experience, where it does allow you, like an alt space VR, it does allow you to sort of participate in the big session, but you can go off into the corner, you can have side chats while not disturbing the main session. It's not the same exact thing, but it's a pretty extraordinarily close thing to that experience of filling in the blank spaces with those side chats that happen in the hallways. So no hard and fast rule, but we're finding our way around it, and that's going to continue to happen. People are going to continue to innovate. Technology is going to, continue. I still walk away from in-person, meetings saying that just felt better for that use case, and that's going to vary by people and by use case.
Amanda, you're nodding a lot, so I'm sure you want to chime in.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's the thing to me is that we have largely innovated very quickly to meet the moment, and most of us can work in a digital or virtual or remote way, barring things that require feet on the ground in factory settings and things like that, like Jason mentioned. But even that is changing, because the whole world has changed around that. So it is those, to me, it's more about the question of what isn't being done well remotely right now, and or can't be, or we think it can't be, and then asking, you know, is that unmoving for some reason? Is there a true reason we need to keep it that way? Or can it be changed or altered or supported with culture shifts or policy shifts or technology? Because like Jason said, tech has been steadily catching up very quickly to the moment, and it will continue to do that. So there are only going to be more opportunities to do the work remotely and supported by tech, but you do miss those in between moments. I did one of my first facilitations in person 2 weeks ago, and it was all about empathy. And so it was one of those topics that you just get so much more being face to face and reading the body language of others and how they're connecting with content and all of that. So you do lose a bit of the nuance of intent and just the general vibe of being in person, working remotely. But I think for the most part, you know, we have all really embraced what that could mean, even organizations and industries that never thought it would be possible for them. And the beauty of that is that it's really opened their eyes to what else could be, instead of we've always done it this way. So I hope that that trend will continue with this.
Yeah, as the tech reporter, it's been fun to see industries say, like, you know, this would take 5 years and it happened in 5 months or even 5 weeks, especially with institutions like schools and hospitals where there's so many red tape or hoops to jump through. And it's like, well, we can't do that anymore. So that's been really fun for me just to report on. We do have some superstars that are attending and have asked questions already. I forgot to mention this beforehand, but we don't want this to be a one-way conversation. If anyone in the audience has questions, there's a little question box on the right-hand side of the panel, and feel free to submit those and we'll get to those at the end. So thank you to those who already have submitted. You guys are the best. But speaking about tech and just things that have helped you kind of adapt to all this, what is one virtual tool your team could absolutely not live without right now? And Amanda, we'll start with you.
I'm not paid to say this by this company, but we use Zoom chat like it's going out of style. So that has been the one tool that our team has been able to adopt across the board. It's allowed us to maintain connections for doing the work and really create these virtual pods for getting the work done well as a team. It's allowed us to connect more globally as an organization, and allowed us to just, you know, goof off a little bit and have some levity and share gifts and share about our lives and share pictures of our families. And so it's really become this hub that's very important to our culture and how we share, because through, you know, over the past almost 2 years, we have grown a lot in other locations. So our team is not all here, and it's really become critical to how we connect no matter where we are. So Zoom chat for sure.
Okay, not sponsored or paid for, just. And is it the VR for you, or is there something else that's even more life-changing?
Sorry, that was to me. Our biggest, probably the foundation of the way that Accenture operates, we always talk about how, because it's the truth, Accenture runs on Microsoft. We rely extremely heavily on Microsoft Teams for everything. In fact, it's so foundational that we now are driving a Teams as the experience platform for Accenture and building all of our applications and bringing all those services to bear right where people are spending their time, which is in Teams. We do over 1 billion minutes a month on Microsoft Teams, and I think that number just continues to grow. The video minutes are similar, and it really is, and this is an important thing when you talk about this shift, the underlying collaboration fabric and that hub for how the team stays together needs to be reliable, consistent, easy to use, intuitive, all those good things. It needs to become such that it is not even thought about, right? And we were fortunate to have moved over from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams in December of 2019, right before things really happened in the world. And it was an amazing blessing for us to have that, and out of the way to where people didn't have to think about that. That was That was there as a foundational piece of the way we worked. We've always been highly distributed. So for us, Microsoft Teams is pretty massively important. But then as we talked about, what's the next era of it? Not to say that it replaces everything that came in the past, right? Just like Teams and Slack and Zoom haven't replaced email. It maybe has changed the way you use email. VR and XR won't replace the things that became before it. It will help change those other things. So I think that those two things are probably most differentiating in our environment.
Okay, great. Jesus, what about you?
Yeah, I'm just gonna combine what the two panelists just said, and really Tech Data. We use a variety of different tools, but Zoom and Teams both have been instrumental in our success with remote work. I mean, to Jason's point, there's going to be times where Zoom may make the most sense, right? And there's going to be other times where Microsoft Teams makes the most sense, especially when it comes to like IM, if you're doing some sort of project task management. Or some type of a group collaboration, group project, there's those aspects as well where Teams has been very successful, and I feel has really contributed to the success of different work streams and different projects that go on at Tech Data. But I will add a couple of the tools just from even like a networking conference, conferencing tools and just like a career fair tools, right? From a recruiting perspective. It's very difficult to meet candidates in this current or in this previous, I don't know if it's current or previous, but environment that we've been in, right? Where, in the past, I would go to University of South Florida or University of Tampa and meet students or meet candidates, right? Or even, being able to travel and go to conferences and meet other folks there and talk to candidates there. And there's tools out there like Hopin and Remo that we have really stepped up their game in terms of providing a place where you can still feel like you're at a conference or a career fair, but not really be there, right? Because it's all virtual. And so there's some platforms out there that we've really capitalized on, or that we've used, or that I've partnered with, from other with other organizations that I work with outside of Tech Data, that utilize some of these platforms and that are just incredible. I mean, the way that they've evolved. Some of them I've seen be used prior to COVID, and I think obviously the impacts really just allowed them to innovate a lot faster and think about things that previously weren't thought of. Things like, okay, how do we do a speed networking through a platform like the ones I mentioned? How do we effectively recruit candidates, using these platforms, and what's going to grab people's attentions other than just like a big giant Zoom with breakout rooms, right? So every platform, every technology, I think, has its pros and cons. And for us here at Tech Data, for sure, Zoom and Teams have been instrumental in our success.
Okay. And I mean, speaking of tech, so I think most people have done a good job adapting to it, but what about digital fluency for employees? Like, how do you make sure all employees are set up digitally to succeed in this environment? What concerns do you have with it, if you have any? So Jason, we'll start with you.
Yeah, we have, we always say on this sort of transformation stuff, sometimes the technology is the easiest part, that the actual change and adoption aspect is the tougher part. And where, unfortunately, a lot of companies don't pay enough focus and get the right skill sets to drive that. And we actually, again, our lineage always goes to where we've had very strong change professionals in our organization, and we formed inside of IT, inside of my digital experience team, there's a journey and change team focused on, the term we use for the space that they're in is like digital worker change and adoption. So their whole focus is to ensure that people understand what tools are available, when to use what tool. It's like in any organization, the IT group is confronted with hey, there's a whole smattering of tools. When do I use, when I'm trying to do this use case, how do I do it, and what tool and what combination of tools in these days do I use? So we have invested in a pretty large global team focused on change and adoption, and the results have been phenomenal because more often than not, people are aware of the tools, or they may have used maybe 5% of what's possible, but really getting them comfortable with how you actually execute a full use case with a tool has been really important. Digital fluency, or whatever terminology you put to it, is such an important thing. And now as we shift from, when we shifted from what we used to into full remote, we had to help people with that. So we created a whole host of resources to help people through that, and training and experts that would go in and help teams facilitate sessions in the new way. But now we're shifting into this world where there's going to be this different mix of people on site and remote. And how do you make sure that there's the right equity of participation in that new mix model where we had to shift to full remote? And so I think this is something, and this doesn't go away when we shift into this new thing. This continues to grow because the number of tools, the capabilities of the tools just keeps changing, right? It's like every week there's a new set of features that come in all these tools we've talked about, and users don't know how to use them. You got to have someone that trains them on doing that and measuring how that adoption is going. So important.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Is I think a lot of people think, oh, so-and-so knows how to use Zoom or knows how to use Teams, but like, do you really know, or you just know the bare minimum and there is so much more that could be done? So, I mean, Jesus, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we really, from a tech data perspective, we really gathered the support from, IT, talent management. We've taken opportunities to create trainings, even through our own, internal portals or internal training capabilities to help employees understand tools better, whether it's, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or, even other tools that we utilize internally that in the past they weren't frequently used, but because of the nature of the business changing, the need for those tools was that much greater. And so we responded, I think, very well to those transitions and adapted very well to being able to create digital fluency, right? And for those that previously either weren't accustomed to certain tools, create the means for them to become accustomed and to adopt them very well and very quickly. And so I think it's simply that is just really having the right team members in place and the right departments in place to respond to certain changes rapidly and do it in a way that will develop these trainings for whether it's employees, consultants, whatever the case may be, in order for them to be successful as quickly as possible, right? And giving them the tools that they need. And so, I think those are just some of the aspects that we've taken into account or responded to as we've seen these changes occur.
Amanda, I'm curious your answer, since you are not like this massive company like Tech Data or Accenture that can just create a whole team just for this purpose. So how are you guys making sure digital literacy and fluency is being implemented, I guess, throughout your company?
Sure. So what we really focus on, and we talk about digital fluency a lot for our organization and organizations we work with, because they vary in size as well, from 2-person startups to global organizations. So for us, and to me, it's really important to focus on that word fluency. We hear digital and we think it's something that, okay, we got you the tools, you're good to go, here's my training, be off and do well. And so that fluency word is the more critical part for our team, and really for any team to focus on. So it's really about building that muscle and thinking of it in that way, where we not only talk about openly our tech pitfalls and the digital way that we work that's not going well, but what is going well, what we might want to try, what we might want to pilot, and really making sure it's more than a one and done with these efforts. And leaders and organizations, just for ourselves included, are creating more opportunities and check-ins to ask what feels hard about working digitally in one-on-ones, and making resources easy to find for continued learning and continued education, and troubleshooting resources and self-guided learning as you go, so that you're really building that fluency muscle and not just, okay, now I use tools, but I'm doing the bare minimum because I either don't have time to carve out to train more on that, or I don't understand where to find the resources to bring myself up to speed on it. So the other part of that is just discussing as a team, for us, making investments in certain tools can be a big conversation and a big line item. So having the discussion about how this will be a big change, it means trying and failing certain things. It means asking you all to participate with us as we test this stuff out. And it especially means being honest with your feedback, and not being scared that because we have, invested in this thing that we won't change it if you say it really doesn't work for you, because you need all of that. So it's really this two-part system of having open two-way communication and then making sure it's a consistent effort for building that fluency muscle for us.
Really good advice. I know you guys probably read a lot of papers and academia things that have been about the future of work, and for the most part, I find them insightful and interesting. But is there anything that you read on the future of work that's like a bad take or something that has picked up steam that you just can't really get behind? So Amanda, you're nodding a lot, so we'll start with you.
So I really like this question because I was talking about it with my colleagues recently. And, you know, over the past year and a half, as we talk about the future of work and what that means, the future employee and what they look like, there's been a huge uptick in the value placed on authenticity amongst one another as colleagues, as leaders, as organizations. And so I read a take on authenticity recently, and the author was arguing for the dark side of authenticity and basically saying that, you know, we're taking it too far, and that, you know, all of these outlooks that say that's going to become this critical leadership skill and just people skill are not correct. And that the key to leadership always has been and always will be some level of faking it. And so we were having a discussion about that, and I really think that that notion of faking it is not correct, and in fact is how we have found ourselves in a burnout epidemic just across the board in the US. And so, you know, I really think it's more about the obvious thing, that you need to show up in a way that puts your own emotions aside sometimes, and that's not faking it, it's just being responsible and understanding your impact and your influence on others. And so there's a real difference and nuance in that to me, about how, you know, authenticity and empathy, we have so much work to do there that I don't think it's a necessary counterpoint right now. Maybe if one day we're all weeping, you know, on each other and not getting any work done, that counterpoint is valid. But I think it's kind of a dangerous notion to introduce when we have so much work to do there as it stands. So that was just one that was like super top of mind because we were just discussing the merits and you know, non-merits of that take.
Yeah, interesting. Bold move to say, like, you know what, let's not be authentic. But interesting. Jason, what are your thoughts? Have you seen any bad takes that you just cannot get on board with?
Well, I love Amanda, so I'm not sure I could top that one, but the thing that I just cringe every time I see a headline when a company publishes that they're mandating or they're going to have employees work a certain number of days on site or at a location. To me, I think this misses the entire point of everything we've been talking about today, which is there is not a one size fits all. There is not, we're no longer in a period where we dictate to employees that we want the best out of a certain model that is going to work for everyone universally. And when we go to the extremes, especially some very forward thinking, you would think, you know, tech companies that are doing this and then end up, you know, they publish a time frame and a date and a number of days, and then they have to retract that because of, you know, internal feedback on that. I just think this is a bit tone deaf these days when everything we've talked about is a more human-centric approach and figuring out what works for everyone, not just by department, but by all those other variables that come into play. So every time I read one of those articles that passes my eyes, it gets me. And then I do think, quickly touching on Amanda's point a little bit about empathy, but maybe going on the inclusivity side. I think there is just this general binary feeling that, like, if you are on site, you're going to have a more inclusive experience, and we're going to have disparity when we start getting people into offices, and then the inclusion problem we had before is only going to get worse. And I actually think, if you think about this optimistically, we have an incredible opportunity to change behaviors through the use of tools, but also training the culture differently, about teaching people how to ask people to be included in discussions. And so little things can start to make a difference here. You know, when you're done with Teams or a Zoom call, sometimes you'll get that random, you know, how was the quality of the call? Imagine at the conclusion of calls, it asks you maybe 2 or 3 more questions. How included in that meeting did you feel? As if you were the meeting organizer, do you feel like you included everyone you could have in the discussion? And it starts to maybe get us thinking a little bit different about, oh my gosh, you're right. The people that are in that physical room probably felt even more left out than all the people remote, because we've got all these things going on, the side chat going, and the people in the room are just like sitting at the screen, not feeling like they're a part of the discussion. Something we would have thought was completely backwards if we thought about this a year and a half ago. So I think when we talk about inclusion and diversity, I think if we look at this world going forward optimistically, we've got some amazing ways to retrain our people to think about inclusion now, because we have this forcing function of the proximity of and location of where teams and people are gathering together to get stuff done. So I think those 2 things, you know, weigh on me very heavily as I think about how we step into the future here, or into the now, as you call it, Amanda. I love that. So yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. Whoever's listening out there, start coming up with software to ask about, was this call inclusive? So I love that. I think that'd be really helpful and make people think a lot harder about, yeah, who was included and who wasn't. Hey, Susan, I know you have a lot of opinions. So is there any bad take out there that you've seen?
You know, I think I'm going to reciprocate a lot of things that Amanda and Jason said, but for me, one of the biggest things, and like I've read articles and I've seen certain headlines about this too, is just like emotional intelligence, right? And being conscious of people at home, you know, and the fact that their situations and their work environments are very different. And do you, as either a manager, as a peer, as a colleague, as a customer, are you being mindful and are you empathizing with their current situation? If you hear a baby crying in the background or there's a bunch of noise going on around, are you making judgments off of that, right? Are you making decisions off of those aspects? And you know, I've seen some articles that read where, like, you know, how do you manage employees that have all these things going on, or, you know, around them? And, you know, and for me, it's like, well, you don't, because, you know, their situation is going to be different than the next person. And so you as a manager, even myself as a recruiter, I don't talk to a candidate, and if I hear, you know, somebody in the background, you know, or maybe their Wi-Fi is in and out. Before, as a recruiter, you might have been like, oh, well, that person probably wasn't as prepared. But now it's like, well, now you got to take that into account, and that, you know, you got to be very mindful of that. You got to be empathetic, and you have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence to understand, like, that, hey, their situation is going to be very different than mine, and I need to be aware of that. And I'm not going to make a decision whether or not they should work at Tech Data because of a baby crying in the background. Like, no. You know, so for me, those are some topics that I've heard of, and where they say that, you know, how do you manage a certain employee, or how do you hire a certain candidate, so on and so forth. And so you just have to really take into account, you know, people's situations, and that not everybody's going to be the same, or not everybody's going to have the same privilege to have a stable Wi-Fi connection, or to not have kids in the background, right? So those are just some things that I would say about that topic.
Yeah, I love it. I think that really has been changed with the pandemic, where people are so much more understanding of, like, if you have a baby crying. Before, yeah, it was like, oh, why can't they, whatever, handle this? But it's like, no, we're all human, and like, we all have stuff going on in the background, and it is what it is. I think that really has been a silver lining of this whole thing. One last question from me, and then we'll get to the audience questions, because they're really good. But just from my end, so when it comes to employee of the future and what that looks like, what's the one thing you want the audience to take away? And anyone can start.
I'm going to borrow something Amanda said that I feel so strongly in, employees they've always had a voice, but I think right now, in going forward, the human centric approach that organizations increasingly are taking is putting direct, you know, employee feedback into the changes at a pace we've never seen before, right? You know, companies would do employee surveys all the time, and maybe 6, 12, 18 months later, you might see some aspect of a change coming from feedback. Now, it's almost instantaneous that some of these actions are being taken in organizations, and that's not going to ever slow down. I think that will only, the mechanisms to gather that, both qualitative and quantitative experience feedback, is going to mean that employees are going to see these changes happen. So find ways to bring your great ideas forward because they're being acted upon unlike they've ever been before.
Love that. Amanda, want to continue on?
Yes, yeah. So I think that all of that is very true, what Jason said, and we should, in that same vein, expect each other to show up as our whole selves, and this builds on what Jesus was saying too, and make space for one another to be the whole people that we really are. You know, that is part of how people are using their voices and showing up to work. And the organizations, as you think about, you know, things like the Great Resignation and topics like that, organizations that aren't meeting them there are the ones that are going to lose out on the employee of the now and the future. And so this means that we all have to be open to this very rapid cycle of change and learning that we aren't all accustomed to. No matter our level of experience, our function, our industry, and you know, you have to expect that change to be kind of uncomfortable and know that it will be that way sometimes, and also know that it's necessary and we will all be better for it. And just, you got to embrace the now times for all that they are, which is just kind of a crazy ride, but that's definitely a big part of it.
I love that you guys are all borrowing from one another. It just makes this whole thing so much more fun and interesting. Jesus, what about you?
Yeah, all I want to final note and just say that, you know, times have changed and they're not going back. You know, and I say that, you know, I'm obviously speaking about it from a recruiting standpoint, because as I mentioned earlier in the panel discussion, you know, we're seeing conversations right now that in the past just weren't there, right? I mean, before, you know, a candidate might bring up, hey, can I work remote? And if I can't, that's okay. Like, I'll still take the job. Now it's like, hey, if I can't work remote, I'm not taking your job. All right, and it's a non-negotiable, and I can sympathize with that. I understand why, you know, but you know, as employers, as even job seekers, you know, the times have changed, and we really have to adapt well to. We have to be open-minded, you know, and we have to take into account that certain people are going to have certain needs and wants, and we're going to have to do some kind of give and take. It's really going to be a true negotiation on the workplace, on the work environment, on being your authentic self. Are they really going to accept me for who I am because I asked for remote work, right? Because there are some companies that'll say, hey, no, we really want you to be here, but it's okay if you stay at home. Is it really okay, right? Are you just saying that just to hire me? Or are you saying that because you really feel that if I need to take 2 or 3 days out of the week to be at home, you know, with my kids, or just because I feel that I perform better at home, you know, are you going to accommodate to that? And so, again, there really has been this adaptation as to how negotiations happen when it comes to employees and employers and job seekers with regards to the remote working environment. And like I said, it's not going back. So we either have to evolve with the trend, or, you know, be one of the employers that may suffer from these changes because we're not willing to bend on culture or you know, tradition, or whatever you want to call it. And so that's what I'll add to that.
Okay, great. Well, we have a lot of really good audience questions. We'll try and get to most of them. I don't think we're gonna have time to get to all of them, unfortunately, but there's some really good ones. One, I won't call him out, but it's someone from Tampa General Hospital, so it's exciting already. And he asked, are there any concerns about quote unquote losing culture in a situation where teams are 100% remote versus a hybrid model? IBM and Yahoo had negative experiences with the culture loss in years past. Thoughts on that? Anyone can take that, obviously. Culture is a big thing that I hear a lot, especially in Tampa, that people are very concerned about.
And it's the precise reason that for our onboarding experience, we said we can't rely just on video calls like this when we can't bring people physically together, because the culture is what happens in the space between the formal work that folks do. And in the VR experience that we're seeing already positive results from, we are getting that feedback that, hey, actually, I got the formal thing that I needed to about how Accenture does this and that, but then I got between the lines what Accenture is all about, because I had those more informal discussions. Again, it's not going to be a solve all, but it is a massive concern. I totally empathize with that question, because it is a company's culture is the most important thing that can keep people engaged or not. So yeah, that's a big one we work quite a bit on.
Amanda, what are your thoughts?
I'll just add that, going distributed or remote or hybrid does definitely require some rethinking and creativity for maintaining your culture. And some elements of your culture might change. How you work together, certain expectations of one another, all of those things. But I was working with an organization that had a really particular vision for their culture recently as a tech organization, and they moved from being totally together to totally distributed in this past year and a half. And so one of the things that we've been working through is this idea of a hub structure. So where they do have more than one employee, and even where they don't, where they just have one, establishing these mini cultural hubs, because mini cultures are there too within larger cultures. They just develop that way. So having these hubs that help maintain those in-person connectivity points that we all want and need, but on a more micro level, and then finding those opportunities to all connect at a higher level altogether too. So that's something that would work for them, but it won't work for everyone. So you definitely have to think creatively about how to make your culture continue to be this connected thing that makes sense for you. And it's like another non-answer, but it's just one of those where it truly depends, and you have to rethink it, because there is a risk of losing it. The question asker is not wrong.
And Jesus, we're going to hold off on you since I want to get to this last question, and I want you all to answer it. Really good question. I'm not sure where she works, but she says our office is open to those that want to come in, but hardly anyone takes advantage of that. Employees have been vocalized to overwhelmingly that they want to keep working remotely. However, they also say they miss their pre-COVID camaraderie and culture. Hard to reconcile the two issues, as the camaraderie and culture that is missed is directly correlated to working face to face. So it kind of goes along with the last question, but any advice on that?
Yeah, you got to make, and you, again, going to that, you want to make coming into the office an improvement from what people have experienced and gotten really good at over the last year and a half. And the way we're thinking about it is, the reason people would come into an office is because they were going to be doing something along with others. They were going to be collaborating in a meeting, design thinking session. And so make that use case amazing in your office, right? Make it to where they see the differences when they come in and use a Surface Hub, for instance, like digital whiteboard, and all of it just works perfectly and it's intuitive. People will figure out really quick, I don't really have to come into the office, but when I do, those types of sessions are amazing. So we're really focusing on those use cases that people come into the office, make them amazing in the office.
Okay, Jesus, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'll quickly add to this, and I'll combine the two questions. The one that was asked before, because I think it directly relates to this, and I would challenge anyone to think about, what does culture mean to you, right? Because if you had a strong culture before COVID, it should survive after, right? And after these adaptations and the changes that have occurred from a remote standpoint. And so if your culture was strong beforehand and you just had really good cohesivity, like I'll say this, like from a tech data perspective, we've adapted very well, because I think that we just have a certain type of people that we recruit. I really feel that way. When I talk to my managers, when I talk to new candidates, there's just a certain type of person that we hire, and it doesn't happen intentionally. It just so happens that every time we interview somebody, we choose that person. And not to mention, we also have business resource groups and diversity and inclusion groups that are specific to different communities and that allow us to really stay connected. To answer the second part of the most recent question here, it's really just going to what Amanda said, is being creative in how you develop that culture, being creative in how you being creative and inclusive on how you collaborate with the team, right? Because some people may not still be comfortable with coming into the office. They might still be thinking about all these crazy things that are happening in the world, and so you got to keep those people in mind, and you got to create some level of, hey, we'll go to a bar and have some drinks and hang out as a team, but we'll also keep in mind the folks that are at home. Maybe we do some type of a Zoom chat and have a virtual happy hour, right? So, switching it on and off, from time to time to make sure that you're including everybody and being creative in how you include everybody.
Okay, Amanda, round us out.
I know we're out of time, so quickly just reinforce that idea of options. People historically have terrible recall on what they think they want and what they actually want. So, you have to provide options for people to plug back into work, into camaraderie, and into in-person opportunities based on comfort level, based on lifestyle, based on what they need and want as people. So options are super key, and so are pulses to understand if your efforts are actually doing what you meant for them to do. So just I'll put a little end cap on what was already all said very well.
Perfect, appreciate it. And yeah, this is our first time we've ever gone over, so I really appreciate everyone for hanging with us. And big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Accenture, and also to our founding partners, University of Tampa, Omni Public, and Synapse. Anyone who has registered will get a video of this tomorrow, and there will also be a recap written by me tomorrow on tampabayinno.com. So if you missed it or just want to hear it again, since it was such a great convo, you have the chance to do that. Otherwise, thank you very much to our panelists again. This was a really fun conversation. There was a ton we didn't get to, so I think it just shows that we had a lot to unpack, and hopefully it helps some of the question askers out there. But thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.